this is what I totally got this from Klaus Schwab's book, in his 2020 book, The Great Reset. It is all about, it's all about global governance. This is the term he uses, and globalism. For him, that means global governance. It doesn't mean what we might think of sort of free markets, or I think it's about control. And I think that's perhaps what you mean when you say socialism.
Yes.
Is it that sort of?
Yes. Well, it's
ideology?
autocratic. So, like, I look at socialism as the state is controlling. The state says, like here in the UK, oh, we have plentiful oil and gas in the North Sea, but at Miliband, I have decided to steal that from you, British people, and we're not going to drill there. I'm going to slap on an 80% windfall tax.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, we're going to virtue signal because we're going to import, our gas from Norway, but it looks like we're bending the curve on our carbon emissions, right? That is the state coming in. If people were asked, like, it should be democratic, right, where people choose what they want to do with their country's resource.
Well, actually, funny that you mentioned that. In the Great Reset, he makes this argument about what he thinks is the trilemma, which is that there's democracy, there's sovereignty, and there's global government. Or he calls it globalization, but I think he means global governance. And he argues that they're not all compatible with each other. But then he doesn't go on to defend democracy or sovereignty. He then goes on to make a big defense about global governance. So it's quite clear what his priorities are. I wondered if you yourself were at Davos. Did you go to the WEF? What were your experiences with them?
The WEF is much more than Davos. I get some, folks like, sending me messages to say, Desiree, like, what's your hang up with the WEF? It's just a think tank that has an annual conference in Davos. I'm like, no, it's not. The WEF is huge. Its tentacles affect every part of your life. It is shaping, like, you have to understand that. The WEF shapes markets. It shapes national policy, education, media, and financial flows. You have to understand that.
Okay, you have to explain that, because there's a lot of conspiracies about the WEF, from the sort of lizard people controlling the world to sort of everything imaginable, and for good reason. The world's elites, not just politicians, but the sort of corporate leaders, are all going to this one place and having behind closed doors conversations. Yeah, we're going to be conspiratorial about it, because what the fuck is going on over there? So you say they are, in fact, controlling the world.
100%.
You have to make the case how, because even it's not totally clear to me. Okay. I mean, they're influencing the world. I'm certainly convinced they're influencing the world, but you're going further and saying they're controlling the world.
Yes. Well, maybe not China, right? Or Russia, or, Trump's America.
Okay, the West. Then
but yes, the left-wing West, yes. Yeah. So it's because, okay, so here, the WEF is about 800 people based in Switzerland. They have 4 other offices globally. They don't actually disclose how many people work there, but safe to say above 1,000 people work for the WEF. There are 22 industry sector groups at the WEF, right? So it has, a big membership network, and there are 22 industry sector groups, 37 future councils. So I was on one of the 37. On my council, there's about 20 people. So 37, these are all external experts, if you will, right, across academia, business, politics, the regulators, media is present. And so 37 of these future councils with 20 members. Now, remember, each of these sector groups or councils have their own monthly meetings, right? Sometimes it's twice a month. They have all their own conferences, plus there are over 140 projects. I'm not making this up. This is on the WEF website. So you can verify everything they disclose it because they're proud of it. They conduct a risk report every year. So this is how it works. So they reach out to their expert network, right? Their members, right? And, funded academics. And they determine what's wrong on planet Earth. What are our biggest challenges? What are our biggest risks? And so the WEF determines what our problems are, and then they determine the solutions. And so no surprise, it is climate, misinformation, right? Social injustice, And then their solutions are, of course, net zero, censorship against hate speech because of all this big bad Trump misinformation, right? And, woke border controls and DEI to address inequality. So that is their, it is like they decide, like we don't decide it. So,
You still haven't convinced me on how they're deciding. I mean, this isn't that different to, let's say, a think tank. I mean,
well, they are.
At what point are they actually making the decisions? Is it soft power they have or hard power they have?
So I would say, it's soft power, but you have to understand that when you have people like, there's no difference between the agenda that Mark Carney has, right, to Keir Starmer, to Macron, to Ursula von der Leyen.
Yes, it's the same worldview.
It's 100% the same agenda, right? The same.
Yeah. So it's soft power.
But it's tremendous power on topics we never voted for. So is it soft or hard? Because it's been implemented. We never voted on, to have open borders and, to fund all these crazy woke ideas. We never voted on, hiking up our energy bills because of net zero. We never voted on digital IDs or central bank digital currency.
But we did vote for Keir Starmer. And so I think I agree with what you're saying. But the point is here, Klaus Schwab isn't actually saying, Starmer, you have to do this. What is actually happening is that there is this big kind of conflab. They get together, they all swim in the same waters, just as you were swimming in the ESG waters those years back. They don't hear any alternative opinions, so their ideas are not checked. And then they go home thinking how great they are because they've been rubbing shoulders with all the world's elite. And they are convinced that those are the most brilliant people in the world. They are saying such and such, so they must implement these ideas. We, the people, could vote them out.
Yes, but information, they're lying to the public. They've manufactured a climate crisis. There is climate change, but there is no climate crisis.
Yes.
So you have to understand, the WEF will work with, large asset managers, consultants, and governments, and they're all in on it because they all profit from it. It's hugely profitable. But the most important thing, it's a job enrichment scheme. You're there for life. Fear sells. So the problem is that
that's such an important point, though, because these politicians who eventually are going to lose their jobs, almost all of them, they're rubbing shoulders with the corporates who are going to give them jobs whenever they leave Brussels or Westminster. That's an important point. Sorry, that's the definition of cronyism, by the way.
Totally agree. Yeah. There is this tremendous, and people are surprised by that, this public-private partnership happening. So it surprised me. I would be in the room and everybody around the table, especially big business, they're all pro-regulation. And I'm sitting there like, what? That goes against capitalism. That's against our system. Why would we want more red tape?
Mm-hmm.
That just leads to economic decline. We know that. But then I'm realizing, of course they want more regulation because again, they have their job, they'll get another bonus. There's more bureaucracy, right? Because they're all bureaucrats at the end of the day. They're not making anything. They're the opposite of Elon Musk. So they want more regulation because now their job as sustainability officer or their academic role, that they have more funding, right? Mm-hmm. And there's more, right? At these big corporations, if you have more regulation, there's a higher barrier to entry. So you can take out your competition, right? Because you're big enough to adapt to more compliance costs. But you're working with the government. You're in on it. You're getting government contracts. So it becomes a feeding frenzy absolutely both ways. You have... You're absolutely right that you get voted out of office or you do something bad. Well, guess what? You're going to get hired at one of the private equity firms or one of the, the big asset
or Nick Clegg going to Meta. Yes. A perfect example of it.
So you've got that. And that's when, for myself, when I understood that this will never stop, right? Their own selfish interests are here. The people are never spoken about. It is just their job security for life and more funding, more back and forth. But again, it's the untruths that are told to the public. They will promote that there is this climate, catastrophe, that the world is on fire.
Yeah.
Right. They will use any incident like, 10 people died in France this week from heat. Well, it's like maybe, actually, 10 times more people die from the cold, first of all. And maybe if you didn't have net zero and restrict air conditioning, they wouldn't have died. So there is, two sides of the story, but our media is so slanted. And that's what I fear. So when we're talking about hard or soft power, I hear you. Of course, it is just an agenda, that they've agreed upon. But they've also agreed upon, the story that gets out there to people. So voters in the UK, yes, the UK voted for Keir Starmer. On what basis? Didn't they vote for less red tape, economic growth? Didn't people vote for lower energy prices? They didn't vote for higher energy prices. I can tell you everything goes up. Right? So had they actually been truthful, right, I don't think Labour would have gotten in. And
to be totally fair, there's a bad example I used by Starmer because people didn't really vote for him. I think he got 20% of the electorate actually voted for him, and it was only because the right was split that he got into power. But the point I was trying to make is that we, the people, have a choice, and we could hypothetically, as they've done in America, voted in someone who goes against the Davos worldview.
100%. And that's, another question you asked earlier is when did the backlash happen? It really happens in 2022. You have all these stories of greenwashing come out. You have ESG portfolios underperforming. You have red state financial controllers going hang on a second. We've been entrusted to invest pension money from teachers, firefighters, police officers. And somehow we were steamrolled into a default option by BlackRock to invest in an ESG fund. Well, hang on a second. It's like the example I gave earlier. That didn't optimize financial returns. These people have worked hard. They didn't give, their money over to a pension fund. That's like running around saving a polar bear. They worked hard so that they have, decent financial returns for retirement, right? And that's where you have, a lot of people think it was this redneck movement. No, it was based on financials. People understood that this was a scam, and they didn't elect for their pension money to go into DEI projects or to go into net zero. They wanted to invest in the overall market. They wanted to optimize their retirement money. So you have pushback in the US. The story comes out, financial returns are bad. Energy prices start going up. You're looking around saying everything is about identity politics, right? People are getting hired, promoted based on what they look like instead of what they're doing. And people are getting really agitated by this. So the Americans, obviously, eventually push back.
So much so now that they're being penalized if they have ESG policy or DEI policy.
That's right.
Meanwhile, in 2022, whilst the great debunking begins, Schwab is doubling down and he publishes The Great Narrative, which is absolutely hilarious. And just to a point you made earlier, which I always find this puzzling, but kind of funny. He writes of that book that it's a hopeful book that categorically rejects the doomsday mindset, consigning humanity to a future of oblivion, whilst, and then I've listed every single term of every time he uses climate catastrophe, climate crisis, point of no return, catastrophic effects of the climate change in our lifetime, existential threat facing humanity, weather disasters, we stand on the brink of not just abrupt and violent change, but disaster. And we've reached the point of no return. I mean, but this is just a fraction of the book being littered with this stuff. So they're going and wondering, they're doubling down. Thanks for watching this clip from the Winston Marshall Show. You can click here to watch the full episode, and for more clips like this one, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, be well.